Chapter 261. At this moment, no one's feelings were more complicated than Tang Yu's. On one side was his Chi-Chi, and on the other side was Jinrong and his cousin. He didn't want any of them to get hurt. However, his cousin ended up like this because of Chi-Chi. Lin Jinrong was pushed into the operating room. All the specialists from Yanghe Hospital had entered. A long operation was the most torturous. Pei Chi-Chi stood there with a blank look in her eyes. She was covered in blood. Tang Yu's coat was draped over her shoulders, and he was holding her with one hand. Otherwise, she would have collapsed. The Lins were all there, including Lin Yun. When they saw Pei Chi-Chi covered in blood, they were a little surprised. However, because they were worried about Lin Jinrong and Tang Yu, it wasn't convenient for them to ask. Pei Huan was also staying in this hospital. Her child was saved, but when she woke up, she heard the news of Lin Jinrong's car accident. She got up from the hospital bed and rushed here. She was only wearing the hospital gown, and she didn't care about her pregnant body. She cried hoarsely. Lin Jinrong's mother couldn't stand it and reprimanded her. "Jinrong is fine, why are you crying?" Pei Huan couldn't stop crying. She covered her mouth and was still crying. Her vision was blurry. She vaguely saw Pei Chi-Chi standing in front of her, and Tang Yu was holding her. Suddenly, Pei Huan ran over like a madwoman and pulled Pei Chi-Chi to the side. She raised her hand and wanted to slap her. Tang Yu quickly caught her and threw her aside. She fell right on top of Zhou Meilin. Zhou Meilin felt guilty. What a sin. She wanted to hit Pei Chi-Chi. How did Jinrong end up like this? She heard that the man in the black limousine died on the spot. Fortunately, he was dead. Otherwise, she wouldn't be able to clear her name. Based on Pei Chi-Chi's temper, even if she didn't die, a layer of her skin would be peeled off. Zhou Meilin steadied Pei Huan and helped her up carefully. Then she said to Pei Chi-Chi sternly, "It's okay that you liked Jinrong in the past, but now Jinrong and Huan are married and you have Tang Yu. What else do you want?" Zhou Meilin tried her best to act. Her tears and snot were running down her face. "Auntie knows that I've let you down, but how can you be so vicious? Jinrong is so young, and he's about to be a father. How could he become like this because of you?" Pei Chi-Chi's gaze fell on her face. Her face was still empty, as if there was not a trace of life in her. If she had to choose, she would rather be the one who got hit. She couldn't afford it. Lin Jinrong didn't owe her. What was Zhou Meilin saying? Was he saying that she was the one who caused it? Pei Chi-Chi just stared at Zhou Meilin, making Zhou Meilin's heart numb. Did this girl know something? Pei Chi-Chi slowly took out her cell phone from her pocket. The cell phone was stained with blood. She just looked at Zhou Meilin like that. "Lin Jinrong called me more than 10 times, but I switched my phone to silent mode when I met the bank manager in the bank." Zhou Meilin shrank back guiltily, but she immediately straightened her body. "Isn't that normal? You've always been flirting with each other, but my Pei Huan is pitiful." Pei Chi-Chi ignored her cries and said coldly, "He called me so many times, and he was able to find me. This means that he knows the truth, and the only person who knows the truth is Pei Huan." Chapter 262. However, before Zhou Meilin could pounce on him, she was dragged away and thrown on the ground like a rag. Pei Chi-Chi turned on her phone. There was a voice message from Lin Jinrong that she had never heard before. As soon as she opened it, Lin Jinrong's anxious voice could be heard. "Pei Chi-Chi, don't go out. Don't cross the road." It was a little blurry towards the end, but he could hear the words Zhou Meilin clearly. Zhou Meilin's face was deathly pale. She was finished. Pei Huan was also stunned. Her face was ashen. She slowly slid to the corner of the wall and sat on the cold ground. She felt that she had been abandoned by the whole world. She had nothing left. Zhou Meilin had a fierce look on her face. She suddenly rushed over to grab Pei Qiqi's phone, but before she could touch Pei Qiqi, she was thrown out. At first, Lin Jinrong's mother was stunned. Then, she realized that Zhou Meilin was the mastermind behind all of this. As for Jinrong, he only ended up like this because he noticed. Mother Lin stepped forward and gave Zhou Meilin a tight slap. She gritted her teeth and said, "If anything happens to Jinrong, I won't let you off." Pei Huan fell to the ground and raised her head with tears in her eyes. She looked at her mother and smiled softly. "Mom, are you satisfied now? Pei Qiqi is not dead, but Jinrong's life and death are unknown." Half of Zhou Meilin's face was swollen. She looked at Pei Huan and said blankly, "I did it all for you, for me." Pei Huan laughed hysterically. "You did it for yourself. If it weren't for you raising a gigolo, Dad wouldn't have died. If it weren't for you, Jinrong would still be fine, and I would still have hope of getting happiness. But now," Pei Huan wiped her tears. "I wish I never had a mother like you." Zhou Meilin cried out in pain. She never thought that Pei Huan would do this to her. She shook her head. "Huan, Mommy loves you. I don't have a mother like you." Pei Huan shook her head and kept repeating. Zhou Meilin was taken away on suspicion of murder. Pei Qiqi watched as she was taken away. Her legs felt weak, and her body felt weak. "Pei Qiqi, you won't have an easy time." Zhou Meilin cried out unwillingly. Her eyes were bloodshot. "You bastard, you won't have happiness." Zhou Meilin suddenly laughed. Her eyes were bulging and her mouth was wide open. It looked a little scary. "Pei Qiqi, I won't tell you that Zhao Ke is the mastermind. I'll just wait for you mother and daughter to kill each other." Pei Qiqi closed her eyes. When she opened them again, she looked at the door of the operating theater that seemed like it would never open. She stood there for more than 10 hours without feeling tired. Tang Yu, the Lins, and Pei Huan were the same. However, no amount of prayer could help Lin Jinrong. When the doctor came out, his expression was solemn. The patient might not wake up. Mama Lin was stunned. She couldn't take such a blow. Her fingers gripped the doctor's arm tightly. "What do you mean by, might not wake up?" The doctor didn't say anything, but everyone understood that this meant that Lin Jinrong had become a vegetable. Pei Huan was stunned. She rushed over with disheveled hair. She looked really pitiful. The doctor shook his head. "Mrs. Lin, we tried our best." Chapter 263. By the time Pei Qiqi came back to her senses, they had already arrived at Xia City. At this moment, she was sitting on the edge of the bathtub in the bathroom. Tang Yu filled the bathtub, then squatted down and helped her to undress her. There wasn't much expression on his face, but he was very serious and meticulous, as if he had a lifetime to do this. Pei Qiqi grabbed his hand and looked down at him. Her voice was hoarse. "Tang Yu, I want to go to the hospital." Tang Yu's fingers paused. Then, he raised his head and looked at her little face. After a long time, he said, "What's the use of you going there? He did it to save me." Pei Qiqi closed her eyes. "Tang Yu, you don't know this, but I saw his car crash into me and he rolled in front of me. He lost so much blood." At that time, she knew what Jinrong wanted to say, so she lied to him. She told him that as long as he was alive, she would be with him. However, Jinrong still couldn't wake up. He didn't say a word, his deep eyes were locked on her little face. "I want to go and watch over him. Even if I can only see him, even if I can feel him breathing, I will feel more at ease." Pei Qiqi's tears fell from the corner of her eyes. They didn't fall into her long hair, but they dyed her little face and his heart. Tang Yu's fingers caressed her little face. Her face was cold. He touched her for a while before he said in a hoarse voice, "Chi-Chi, I know how you feel. I'm sad too." He pressed his forehead against hers. After a while, when my aunt calms down a little. Pei Chi-Chi was stunned. She pushed him away and looked straight at him. There was a sharpness in her eyes, like the expression of a small animal after it was hurt. He felt his heart ache when he saw it. His fingers caressed her little face, and his voice became deeper and hoarser. "Chi-Chi, it's not your fault, it's my fault. Tang Yu, if it weren't for me, Jinrong wouldn't have gotten into trouble." Suddenly, she pushed him away like a madwoman and ran to the door. Her clothes were messy and she was barefoot, but she didn't care. She ran to the door like a madwoman. Tang Yu took a few steps forward and pulled her back. Her slender body was firmly held in his hands. She was so fragile that it seemed like she would break at any moment. "Pei Chi-Chi, if you go now, it will only make my aunt feel worse. Do you know that?" He locked his eyes with her, his gaze heavy. Pei Chi-Chi did not move. She did not move at all. Her gaze was fixated. After a long time, she finally understood what he meant. Because of her, Jinrong had become like this. She had become an unpopular person. She was in a daze. She did not speak or move. She just kept crying. Tang Yu closed his eyes and carefully pulled her into his arms. His large palm pressed on her little head. "Chi-Chi, listen to me." Pei Chi-Chi's little hand clutched his clothes tightly. She cried in his arms. "Tang Yu, I don't want to be like this. I don't want him to be like this. I'd rather be myself." Her fingers dug deep into his flesh. Tang Yu was in pain, but he endured it. He only hugged her. His body and heart were heavy. The next time she saw Lin Jinrong was a week later. Under Tang Yu's arrangements, she saw Lin Jinrong. Lin Jinrong had become a vegetable with breathing and a heartbeat. His head was wrapped in gauze and he lay there quietly. Tang Yu stood quietly for a while before he walked out. When he walked out, he heard Pei Chi-Chi's suppressed cries. Chapter 264. Pei Chi-Chi stood in front of Lin Jinrong and said softly, "Jinrong, I'm here to see you." But he couldn't hear her. He was still lying there quietly. "I haven't said thank you to you." Her hand gently grasped one of his. His hand was stiff from lying for a long time, and it was pale from the lack of strength. Pei Chi-Chi lowered her head and looked at his hand, her tears falling one by one. She hurriedly wiped her tears away. She couldn't cry. Jinrong was still fine. How she wished that he could open his eyes and look at her. "Pei Chi-Chi, you said that if I don't die, you'll be with me, but Jinrong, I lied to you. I fell in love with someone else. Is it because I'm punishing me for lying to you that I took you away and made you not wake up? When you wake up, I won't lie to you anymore, okay?" She gripped his hand tightly and sobbed. "You're going to be a father. How can you not wake up?" But no matter how much she said, Lin Jinrong was still lying there quietly, lifeless. He couldn't get up anymore. He looked at her. "Pei Chi-Chi, are you together with Tang Yu?" "Pei Chi-Chi, whatever he can give you, I can give too. Leave him and be with me." "Pei Chi-Chi, how does it feel to be treated as a pet? Look at yourself. Can you still smile?" "Pei Chi-Chi, I haven't forgotten. I slept with Pei Huan. Now, we're the same." He smiled at her, his face pale. But he would never say those words to her again. She burst into tears, crying softly and suppressing her emotions. However, he didn't frown like before. "Pei Chi-Chi, are you unhappy?" When she walked out, her legs were weak and her eyes were a little red. When Tang Yu heard the door close, he put away the cigarette in his hand and turned to look at her. Then he walked over and pulled her into his arms. He didn't say anything and just stroked her fluffy head. She hugged his waist tightly and closed her eyes. Pei Chi received a call from Pei Huan, and they arranged to meet in a cafe. Because of what happened last time, Tang Yu sent 2 bodyguards to follow Pei Chi. Wherever Pei Chi went, they would follow. Pei Huan arrived first. She took off the sunglasses on her face and sneered coldly, "What a big scene. Are you afraid that I'll hurt you?" Pei Chi turned her head and gestured to the 2 men. They retreated outside the cafe. Turning around, he saw Pei Huan take out a cigarette box from her bag and open it. She took out a long and thin cigarette, lit it, and took a puff with her eyes narrowed. Pei Chi paused for a moment. Before she could say anything, Pei Huan had already said, "Don't say anything about smoking being bad for the child. I'm going to beat the child." She said it casually, but Pei Chi was stunned. "The child was beaten?" "Yes, I did. But I took the 50 million from the Lin family and told them that I would give birth to the child." Pei Huan took another puff of the cigarette and said with a faint smile, "But now, how could I give birth to this child? I can't even take care of myself." Pei Chi looked at her cold-blooded face and felt her entire body turn cold. "That is Lin Jinrong's child. Don't you feel guilty at all?" Chapter 265. Pei Chi looked at her and was speechless for a moment. Pei Huan flicked the cigarette in her hand skillfully. "I didn't ask you to come today to talk about these things. I wanted to ask, will you let my mother go? I didn't know you could still think of Auntie at this time." Pei Chi lowered her eyes. "It's not that I don't want to let her go, it's that she didn't let herself go." Didn't Pei Huan and Zhou Meilin feel any guilt towards Jinrong in the hospital? When she asked this question, Pei Huan laughed softly. She laughed so hard that tears came out of her eyes. She rested her face on her arm and didn't move for a long time. When she looked at Pei Chi again, her expression was one of mockery. "Guilty? Pei Chi, are you joking?" Her voice became a little cold. "He became like this because of you. You want me to feel guilty towards him? Pei Chi, are you kidding me?" Pei Chi picked up the cold cup of coffee and tasted it. It was very bitter. She looked up at Pei Huan. "I can't help you, and you can't help me. Pei Huan, take care." Having said that, she stood up. When she stood up, she accidentally took a step back, and the chair behind her made a piercing sound. Pei Chi paused for a moment before walking towards the door. "Pei Chi, you ruined my life." Pei Huan said sternly behind her, "I will never forgive you. I will never admit that I have a sister like you." Pei Chi paused and did not turn around. She only said calmly, "Pei Huan, me too." She raised her head, and tears fell silently from her eyes. If she could choose, she would choose not to appear in the Pei family. Then, nothing would happen to Dad and Jinrong. They would live well and finish their lives in peace. When she reached the door, the bodyguards immediately followed. Pei Huan sat there and watched quietly. Zhou Meilin was sentenced to 10 years for attempted murder. In court, she looked haggard and a little dazed. Pei Huan did not attend. The Lin family knew that she had an abortion. They did not pursue the matter of the 50 million yuan. Instead, they found a lawyer to divorce her. He believed that if Jinrong was awake, he would also make the same decision. It was already autumn when the verdict was made. Walking out of the court, the sun outside was not as hot as it was in summer. Pei Chi looked up and her heart was in turmoil. It was as if she had returned to the day when Jinrong had an accident. Tang Yu accompanied her and placed his palm on her back. Get in the car. Pei Chi sat in the car with him. It was dark in the car, which made her small face look even thinner. After Lin Jinrong's accident, she couldn't sleep for a long time. Sometimes, when Tang Yu slept next to her, she would stare at his profile until dawn. She was silent for a while before she looked up at Tang Yu. I want to go to the hospital. Tang Yu was browsing through company documents with his laptop. When he heard what she said, he put down what he was holding and looked at her in the dark. After a long time, he asked softly, Chi, are you sure? Tang Yu, I didn't mean it that way. She lowered her eyes. I just want to see him today. Because the murderer had been arrested, she thought she should tell Jinrong. Tang Yu leaned against the back of the seat. The fabric of his clothes and the leather seat made a slight sound. After a long time, he said softly, but you should know that it's not suitable for you to meet him. Chapter 266. Although she was young, Tang Yu wouldn't always indulge her. It wasn't because he was cruel, nor was it because he was jealous, but because he had to consider the reality. Pei Chi turned towards him. Seeing the expression on his face, she knew that he wasn't in a good mood. She knew what was good for her. For the past month, Tang Yu had tolerated her too much. Her fingers gently touched his hand. Tang Yu remained unmoved as he tilted his head to look out of the car window. Pei Chi called him like a kitten. Tang Yu. He couldn't bear to leave her out for too long. Turning his head, he looked at her and said, Chi, I hope we can get engaged during the Mid-Autumn Festival. Get engaged? Pei Chi was stunned. But he grabbed her and said in a seductive voice, we've already agreed on this, haven't we? The atmosphere was a little suffocating. In the dim light, he looked at her with a burning gaze, not letting go of the slightest bit of her expression. Pei Chi looked back into his eyes and felt as though her throat was blocked. She couldn't say a word. She couldn't say yes, nor could she reject him. Tang Yu had always given in to her, but this time, he was unusually firm and forceful. After the Mid-Autumn Festival, on the 16th day, we'll get engaged. These few days, she had been afraid. She had been immersed in the emotions of Jinrong getting into trouble for her. He could understand that, but Chi didn't know that he was also afraid. He didn't know what would have happened to her if Jinrong hadn't appeared. Would she be a vegetable? Or would she be gone? He held her hand and pulled her into his arms, hugging her a little tightly. Chi, I know this isn't a good time, but I don't want to change it. He trapped her in his arms, brushed her hair away from her forehead, and looked down at her little face. Pei Chi's heart was beating very fast. He smiled and said, it won't be very grand, but it will be very heartwarming. She looked up at him and said in a hoarse voice, you said it wasn't a good time. She couldn't face the Lin family, and she couldn't pretend to be happy with Tang Yu in front of them. His fingers gently stroked her long hair, and he smiled. Although it's not a good time, but I want to book you. He admitted that he had been provoked. That day, when he rushed to the scene of the accident, he saw her kneeling there and kissing Jinrong. He could not be jealous of Jinrong, nor could he be angry at her. The only thing he could do was to own her. Pei Chi's lips moved slightly. She reached out her trembling hands and hugged his waist. She pressed her face against his chest. At that moment, she felt so selfish. Jinrong had become like this because of her, but she still wanted to be with Tang Yu. Tang Yu, will I suffer retribution? Her voice was very soft, but her heart was heavy. His fingers stroked her face, and a trace of bitterness appeared on his face. How can that be? Even if someone is to be punished, it should be me. Why would my Chi be punished? Her furry one was nestled in his arms, like a little animal. Tang Yu's heart felt like it had sunk. For the past month or so, their emotions had been repressed, so he hadn't touched her in over a month. Tonight, he didn't want to be depressed. Chapter 267. She walked over and knelt beside him. She placed one hand on his shoulder and naturally leaned over to kiss his lips. Although they had done this many times before, this kind of thing was something that Tang Yu never got tired of. His palm pressed against the back of her little head and gently brought her into his arms. Under the dim yellow light, the bathrobe slid down and was thrown to the end of the bed. That night, she gave her body and mind to Tang Yu. Before the engagement, Pei Chi went to visit Lin Jinrong once. She secretly did not tell Tang Yu. Lin Jinrong moved to the nursing home and was taken care of by the nurses. The Lin family would also come over every day, especially Lin Jinrong's mother. Pei Chi found time to come over. There was no one around except for two young nurses. The young nurse knew Pei Chi and was sensible enough not to tell Lin Jinrong's mother about Pei Chi's occasional visits. It could be seen that this girl was a sentimental person. When Pei Chi came over, they went out and stood guard outside. After closing the door, Pei Chi walked to the bedside. It had been more than a month. Lin Jinrong's external injuries were almost completely healed, but he was still in a deep sleep. Other than his pale face, he really looked like he was asleep. Pei Chi gently sat beside him and held his hand, placing it under the blanket. She looked at him quietly and said in a hoarse voice, "Jinrong, I'm going to be engaged to Tang Yu. We'll probably get married in the future." A hint of bitterness appeared at the corner of her mouth. "Jinrong, I originally thought that I would never like anyone else. But after meeting Tang Yu, I realized that this is how it feels to be doted on by someone. You'll definitely be angry and say that Pei Chi, you're not sincere." Her hand touched his palm. "But Jinrong, this time I might really make you angry." She closed her eyes and held his hand to her face. "I've fallen in love with him. I've fallen in love with him." As she said that, her tears slid down and wetted his palm. "Jinrong, I'm sorry. I didn't want to, but I couldn't resist." She smiled lightly and looked at Lin Jinrong with teary eyes. At this moment, she understood that Jinrong might be a vegetable for the rest of his life because of her, but this could not stop her from wanting to marry Tang Yu. She had really fallen in love with the man who had bought her. She loved him very, very much. His body temperature warmed her heart, which was so cold that it had nowhere to rest. "So, Jinrong, sorry. Lin Jinrong's mother stood outside and watched. She naturally heard that Tang Yu was going to get engaged. Of course, the old man was against it and called Lin Yun to scold him for a while. Although Tang Yu held an important position in the Lin family, Jinrong was the lifeblood of the Lin family. Hence, Lin Jinan strongly opposed this marriage. Lin Yun was in a difficult position, but she didn't say anything. In her heart, she had some resentment towards Pei Chi. Since she liked Jinrong, why did she provoke Tang Yu? Moreover, Jinrong was like this because of her. In Mother Lin's heart, she didn't want to see Pei Chi often in the future. She wasn't completely unaware that it was Tang Yu who arranged for Pei Chi to come over sometimes. She didn't stop it because she always had some hope in her heart that Jinrong had Pei Chi in his heart, or that Pei Chi could wake Jinrong up. Chapter 268. When Pei Chi left, her eyes were a little red. The moment she opened the door, she bumped right into Mama Lin. "If you don't mind, let's have a chat." Mama Lin forced a smile and brought Pei Chi to a tea room attached to the nursing home. Pei Chi and Mama Lin sat on opposite sides of each other. Both of them lowered their heads in silence. Mama Lin raised her head to look at her. Indeed, her features were picturesque. No wonder Jinrong and Tang Yu liked her. The waiter in the tea room retreated after pouring the tea. Mama Lin came from a good family background and was well-mannered. She said calmly, "Have some tea first." Pei Chi nodded. "Yes." She took a small sip and looked at Mama Lin. Mama Lin had been looking at her the entire time. "You're indeed beautiful. But sometimes, it's not a good thing to be too beautiful." Mama Lin smiled. However, because of Lin Jinrong, she had lost a lot of weight and her expression was always gloomy. She looked at Pei Chi and said slowly, "I know about the matter between you and Tang Yu." Tang Yu also replied that Old Master wants to marry you, but Old Master doesn't agree to it. As for the reason, I'm sure you understand, Miss Pei. Mama Lin paused for a moment. I've never seen Old Master get so angry. Tang Yu's mother has always been Old Master's favorite. But that day, a teacup was smashed and she was almost injured. Pei Chi raised her head. There was a trace of shock in her eyes. Of course, I'm not saying all this to make you back off. I'm just telling you that this marriage isn't that easy. Tang Yu respects Old Master very much. If Old Master doesn't agree, then Tang Yu will be caught in the middle. Moreover, you probably don't know, but Xing Yuan is the union of the Tang and Lin families. Otherwise, do you think that Tang Ziyuan and Tang Yu's mother are still in contact even though they are divorced? This is a matter of broken bones and tendons. Now, neither side is optimistic. Miss Pei, you should be understanding of Tang Yu. After Mother Lin finished speaking, she lowered her head and took a small sip of tea. Then, she slowly continued, I know you're a good girl. If so many things hadn't happened, perhaps we'd be mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. But in this world, it's hard to explain. We'll never know what will happen tomorrow. Pei Chi looked at her and tilted her head. I know all of this. How could she not know? But Tang Yu had never told her. He said that it wouldn't be very grand, but it would be very heartwarming. What he had to suffer behind the scenes might not be so heartwarming. What he had to face might be Old Master Lin's teacup. Mama Lin smiled faintly. It's good that you know. Pei Chi's gaze was firm. But I won't back down. Tang Yu was willing to stand against everyone else for her sake. Those people were his closest kin. So why couldn't she be selfish for him for once? Just for love. Auntie Lin, I'm sorry. I owe Jinrong, and I owe you even more. But I really love Tang Yu. Pei Chi lowered her head. She was a little ashamed, but she still said bravely, maybe everyone will forgive me if I leave Tang Yu to repay Jinrong, but I can't forgive myself. I hurt Jinrong and Tang Yu. After Pei Chi said that, her tears fell. She didn't wipe them away and stood up. As she walked out, she felt braver than she had ever been. She, Pei Chi, had never been so brave. She had never dared to say it so loudly. Chapter 269. She didn't return to the Pei group but went straight to Tang Yu's company. No one stopped her and she ran straight into his office. Tang Yu was sitting on the sofa with a cigarette between his fingers. He was wearing a simple white shirt and black trousers that outlined his noble figure with two exquisite teacups in front of him. Pei Chi opened the door. Her breathing was still a bit chaotic. She looked straight at him and didn't move. Tang Yu looked up and met her eyes. Then, he put out the cigarette slowly as if he was waiting for something. Pei Chi gently closed the door and ran over. She half knelt in front of him and looked up at him. Looking from this direction, one could see his handsome chin and tall nose. He was extremely noble. Tang Yu, let's get engaged, okay? She looked at him with a touch of emotion on her small face. Tang Yu didn't help her up. He just smiled and said, "Are you proposing to me, Chi-Chi?" "Yes." Pei Chi-Chi pursed her lips and said in a voice so soft that it was almost inaudible, "Are you willing, Mr. Tang?" Tang Yu's eyes hid a little tenderness. After a long time, he smiled gently and said, reluctantly, "This jerk." She hugged his waist with her little hands and kissed his chin. "This is the office, Chi-Chi." He smiled. Although he said that, he didn't stop her. Pei Chi-Chi didn't care. She kissed him randomly and then climbed into his arms. "You used to kiss me like this." "Fine." He hugged her. He really didn't have the heart to tell her that her performance had been lagging behind. A light cough came from behind, followed by an old voice. "Hugging in the office in broad daylight. What a scandal." Pei Chi-Chi was startled. Then, she looked over and saw a dignified, old man. He had an old-fashioned face, gray hair, and was wearing a blue robe. Actually, no one wore this anymore. However, this old man didn't seem out of place when he wore it. He only felt that it was very dignified. Pei Chi-Chi was still holding on to Tang Yu. She struggled to get down, but she was too flustered and accidentally tangled her long hair into the button of his shirt. The moment he tugged on it, his scalp hurt like hell. Pei Chi-Chi was frightened and didn't dare to move. She whispered to Tang Yu, "My hair is tangled." Tang Yu lowered his head and looked at the strand of black hair that was entwined in his xiong's mouth. He smiled, pressed her fluffy little head, and said softly, "Don't move." As he spoke, he very patiently began to untie his hair. Pei Chi-Chi lay in his arms just like that, while Lin Jianan and Old Master Lin were ignored. He reached out to touch his nose and coughed lightly. "I'm still here." Pei Chi-Chi wanted to get up, but the pain made her lie back down again. Obediently. Tang Yu patted her with a calm expression, as if he had done this countless times. "Be obedient. If you don't want the pain, don't move." She really didn't dare to move. Firstly, it was because of the pain. Secondly, she really didn't know how to deal with the furious old Master Lin, and that furious old man glared at Tang Yu. Chapter 270. It was bad enough that he was hugging this girl in front of him, but he was hugging her as if she was a pet. Why? Was he trying to fart a sheep? No matter how he looked at it, he could not find it pleasing to the eye. When they were young and unmarried, how could they behave like this? It was already bad enough to hold hands. Old Master Lin glared at Tang Yu, but his precious grandson acted as if he did not see it. He slowly removed Pei Chi-Chi's hair and patted her back. "Get up and call me grandfather." Pei Chi-Chi looked up at him. Tang Yu smiled. "Didn't you just say that you wanted to marry me?" Pei Chi-Chi got up and stood carefully. She looked at the old man who was obviously not to be trifled with and called out softly, "Grandfather. I don't have such a granddaughter." Old Master Lin was finally looked at seriously. He snorted lightly, sat down, and picked up an exquisite teacup to drink. Pei Chi-Chi's body followed him and turned over. She half squatted down and naturally picked up the teapot to refill his cup of water. Then she said softly, "She's my granddaughter-in-law." Old Master Lin's beard curled up. He stared at Pei Chi-Chi's face and his voice became even harsher. "You little girl, how dare you talk back?" He did not like to be so arrogant and unreasonable. "Tang Yu, we'll split it with this girl now. Calculate clearly how much you should give her. Not a single cent less." Old Master Lin had the air of a dissolute young master who had broken off relations with famous prostitutes. Tang Yu smiled. He had always been calm and composed. In fact, before Pei Chi-Chi came, he had already comforted the old man a lot. Otherwise, things would not be like this now. Grandfather, Chi-Chi is still young. She is different from those women outside. Tang Yu also took a sip of tea, then looked at Pei Chi-Chi and snorted. You only know how to please grandfather. You don't even know how to refill my cup of water. Pei Chi-Chi had never acted like a little wife before. She quickly went over to pour tea for him. After that, Tang Yu didn't let her go. He reached out to grab her little hand and pulled her onto his lap. He had long arms and legs, and she was sitting in his arms like a child. Old Master Lin couldn't stand it anymore. He looked at his usually serious grandson and said, Tang Yu, what's so good about this girl? Although her small face is passable, she doesn't have any chest. She doesn't have any flesh on her body. I don't want to eat it in the pot. Tang Yu glanced at the little fellow struggling in his arms and slowly said, Actually, I've always liked to eat ribs. Pei Chi-Chi was furious. He actually dared to talk dirty in front of old Master Lin. Before he could say anything, Lin Jianan blew his beard and glared at him. Tang Yu, you're wasting your time. Pei Chi-Chi was annoyed. I'm not a thing. After she said that, she was so angry that she bit off her own tongue. What did she just say? Obviously, Tang Yu and old Master Lin were also shocked. They didn't expect Pei Chi-Chi to belittle herself like that. After a pause, old Master Lin stroked his beard and said mockingly, It's said that a woman's virtue is to have no talent. Your stupidity is actually a virtue. Pei Chi-Chi bit her lip and her little face was a little red. Tang Yu chuckled. Hurry up and thank grandfather for his compliment. It's not a compliment. Pei Chi-Chi pursed her little mouth. Her previous flattery was gone and she was a little embarrassed. Chapter 271. Chi-Chi is still young. You can teach her slowly. Tang Yu directly treated her as a child. As he spoke, he touched her fluffy hair again. Old Master Lin was also an experienced person. He was also young once. He watched coldly from the sidelines. He could tell that Tang Yu was probably deeply in love and it was not easy to change his mind. If it was Tang Ziyuan, that bastard, he would not agree to let Tang Yu marry the Shen family's girl. He would never allow Tang Yu to pick up someone else's used shoes without knowing what had happened between the Shen family's lass and the Qin family's boy. It was not that he despised Pei Chi-Chi's background, but this girl and Jinrong. It made people sigh. Putting aside these uncomfortable relationships, this girl could not escape the responsibility of Jinrong's current situation. If he agreed, how could he face Jinrong's parents? Would Lin Yun still be able to return to her parents' home in the future? These were all difficult to handle. Of course, as far as old Master Lin was concerned, he was someone who could distinguish between gratitude and grudges. Jinrong's car accident was ultimately Jinrong's mother-in-law's fault, but Pei Chi-Chi was an illegitimate child of the Pei family. The intricacies in between were all disadvantageous to this girl. Even if she married into the Pei family, it was really hard to say what would happen in the future. Old Master Lin came today because Lin Yun could not make the decision, so he could only come over to make the decision. He thought that Tang Yu would not listen to him, but he did not expect that Tang Yu's attitude was a little subtle. It was very subtle. He did not mention Pei Chi-Chi. If he did not mention this matter, was he preparing to quietly get engaged when the time came? At that time, everyone in B City would know that the Tang family and the Lin family were holding a wedding. If they did not go, they would lose their face. Although it would not look good on Tang Yu, in the end, it would still be the Tang and Lin families who would be slapped in the face. Tang Yu was certain of this, so he was not in a hurry. Very well, in the end, it was them who were in a hurry. Old Master Lin sneered, no matter what, I will not agree to this marriage. Tang Yu was still holding Pei Chi-Chi. He didn't say anything, but his fingers were placed on Pei Chi-Chi's lower abdomen, stroking it from time to time. Old Master Lin Jianan's eyelids twitched. He was not dim-sighted. Tang Yu's action meant. That stupid girl is pregnant with Tang Yu's child. Old Master Shen looked at him. Tang Yu, when did you develop this bad habit of preying on children? You're already an adult, aren't you? You're already an adult, yet you're still holding it in your hands. Tang Yu smiled, but he didn't let go of Pei Chi-Chi. He said lightly, Grandfather, Chi-Chi hasn't been feeling well recently. She always feels like throwing up, and her appetite isn't great either. She's usually very clingy. She'll feel better if I hold her. As he said this, Old Master Lin's eyebrows twitched. Yes, this should be a sign. Old Master Lin's feelings were complicated. In his heart, only the lowest of men would not take responsibility after playing with a woman's stomach. Now that Pei Chi-Chi was pregnant, how could he disagree? Old Master Lin looked a little embarrassed. Well, how long has it been? Grandfather, how long has Chi-Chi been feeling unwell? It's been about half a month. It's better to see a doctor another day to be at ease. Tang Yu said slowly, then lowered his head and kissed Pei Chi-Chi's forehead, as if he was treating a little pet. He didn't avoid Old Master Lin. Chapter 272. Old Master Lin felt that, for a pregnant woman to be in a good mood, she needed her husband's comfort. What if her belly was big? They had to get married immediately. Not to mention getting engaged, they had to get married immediately. Lin Jianan looked at Pei Chi-Chi's belly. The more he looked at it, the happier he was. This first child. His Tang Yu was so capable, so it was undoubtedly a boy. Old Master Lin had been looking forward to it for a long time. Previously, Jinrong's wife was pregnant. Although he did not like that flamboyant girl, he thought that Jinrong's mother would take care of the child in the future. With Jinrong's genes, the child would not be too bad. However, he did not expect that Pei Huan would have an abortion just after Jinrong's accident. That day, Old Master Lin sat alone in the study for the whole day. Later, he threw his most treasured paperweight. Bastard. Later, he was also the one who made the decision to annul the engagement between Jinrong and Pei Huan. This kind of woman could not be kept in the Lin family. As for Pei Chi-Chi, Old Master Lin did mind. This girl's face was too beautiful and attractive. Jinrong and Tang Yu were head over heels for her, but if she was pregnant, Old Master Lin had no reason to object to this marriage anymore. He coughed lightly. Tang Yu, bring this girl to the hospital for a checkup. Don't let her get sick at such a young age. Tang Yu smiled slightly. It shouldn't be an illness. It's just that she is listless all day and has a bad appetite. Pei Chi-Chi was alarmed when she heard that. When did she not eat well and become listless? After Lin Jianan left, she looked at Tang Yu and said in a soft voice, Tang Yu, if you say that, even if grandfather agrees, it will be exposed in the future. He knocked her little head. You're not stupid. As he said that, he got up and walked to his desk. As he flipped through the files, he said to her very calmly, Pei Chi-Chi, are you doubting my ability? Then he looked up at Pei Chi-Chi. She walked over and stood beside him, pursing her lips. No. I don't want children yet. Although the Pei Corporation was on the right track, its foundation was still too weak. It was like a tree that had been eaten dry. His father was easy to talk to, but he turned a blind eye to whatever his subordinates did. That was why they were in such a situation today. How could she have a child with him now? Tang Yu sighed and reached out to touch her little head before saying slowly, I don't think I mentioned that you're pregnant just now, did I? Grandfather was the one who misunderstood. Who else could he blame? Pei Chi-Chi covered her mouth, her eyes filled with astonishment. This is Tang Yu. Sigh, even Tang Yu can be like this. Rascal. Tang Yu smiled, knowing what she was thinking. He shifted his gaze to the files on the table, deliberately giving her the cold shoulder. Sure enough, his little fellow couldn't take it anymore. She lay on his shoulder and pounded him. He let her fool around for a while, then reached out to hold her and kissed her. Chi-Chi, don't feel burdened. I'm here. He ruffled her hair as if it were a fluffy pet. Pei Chi-Chi let him rub her hair for a while before running away. She picked up her bag and said, I'm leaving first. I have a meeting later. He said helplessly, You're busier than me. He raised his hand and gestured for her to come over. Pei Chi-Chi walked over slowly and stood in front of him. After a long time, she looked up at him and said softly, Tang Yu, although I feel very selfish and let Jinrong down, but... Chapter 273. Tang Yu didn't say anything. If he did, she would be in a bad mood again. He reached out to tidy her hair and said gently, Be careful on the road. Pei Chi-Chi nodded and walked out. Xiao Ran came in with a stack of documents. President, these have to be signed. She put them on the table. Tang Yu looked at them in a daze for a while. Then, he put his hand on the documents and looked up at Xiao Ran. Squeeze my work schedule. I want 4 days free next weekend. He and Chi-Chi were about to get engaged, so he had to do something. She had been in a bad mood recently, so he was going to take her out for a few days. Xiao Ran nodded. I will. As for the other things, I will ask President Zhao to handle them. Zhao Yi was Tang Yu's trustworthy person. She thought for a moment. Ask Assistant Meng to come along. Then, she lowered her head to look at the documents again. Xiao Ran saw that there was nothing else for him to do and walked out. When she was outside, she breathed a sigh of relief. It seemed that the president was going to make a lifelong commitment. She didn't know if it was marriage or engagement. She was more inclined to get engaged. After all, Pei Chi-Chi was still young. Pei Chi-Chi and Tang Yu's marriage was finally settled. It was mainly because old Master Lin was eager to have a grandchild, and no one objected. Tang Yu hung up the phone and looked at Pei Chi-Chi. How is it? Do you think I'm smarter than others? Pei Chi-Chi was reading a book. Although she worked during the day, she still wanted to go to school to finish her design major after the company was on the right track. In the future, she would always want to do her own things. As for Pei Corporation, she would let the management team handle it when it was on the right track. Tang Yu leaned against the bar and drank a glass of red wine. He looked at Pei Chi-Chi sitting on the sofa and reading a book. His voice was hoarse. You're working so hard. Pei Chi-Chi bit her lip and looked up at him. What's wrong? Didn't you tell me to finish my studies? She lowered her head. I know, you're afraid that I won't be able to communicate with you in the future. Communication. Tang Yu smiled, his slender fingers playing with the crystal glass in his hand, then he put it on the bar counter and walked over to her. Before Pei Chi-Chi could come back to her senses, he bent over and picked her up. His voice was low and hoarse. I want to talk to you now. Afraid that she would fall, she immediately hung onto his neck and hugged him. Tang Yu, I'm talking about your thoughts. It's so late, Pei Chi-Chi, you want to talk about ideas with me? He chuckled and kissed her. Pei Chi-Chi hugged him shamelessly and buried her face in his neck. Tang Yu, I want to read. He thought for a moment, reached out, picked up the book, and swept it into the study. Why the study room? Don't you want to read? Tang Yu sat on his spacious chair and hugged her. He also stuffed the book into her hands. All right, read it. He said very kindly. As he said that, his big hand had already slipped into her pajamas. Pei-Chi-Chi bit her lip and snorted. How do you want me to read? Tang Yu's lips were close to her ear. His voice was a little seductive because of his passion. You read your books. I'll do mine. Pei-Chi-Chi bit his arm angrily. Shameless. Scoundrel. Tang Yu smiled. He felt that it was good to tease her like this. She was finally a little happier after these few days. Later on, he didn't really do it. He just hugged her and read with her. Chapter 274. Zhao Ku returned home after playing mahjong. She didn't look too good. At first, Tang Axian was clinging to Tang Ziyuan in the living room, trying to get him to agree to go out. She missed Chi-Chi. Tang Ziyuan actually agreed, but he just wanted to tease his little daughter. He still had a compassionate heart and spent a lot of time with Tang Axian. Just then, Zhao Ku came back. Tang Axian looked at Zhao Ku's expression and lost all her thoughts. She said softly, Mom, I'm going upstairs to play the piano. Zhao Ku didn't say anything. Her expression was a little stiff. Tang Axian was confused. What was wrong with her mother today? She didn't even scold her for wearing her mother's least favorite jeans. Tang Axian leaned on the railing to peek. When Zhao Ku saw her, she immediately ran to her bedroom. Tang Ziyuan sipped his coffee and sighed. Tang Axian is your daughter and she has that problem. Why are you so strict with her? Can't you just let her be happy? Zhao Ku murmured, Ziyuan, you also think that Tang Axian won't live long, don't you? Tang Ziyuan was a little unhappy with her words. Zhao Ku, do you know what you're saying? Tang Axian will be very sad if she hears this. If Tang Axian is sad, then I'm not. Zhao Ku had a crazed look on her face. Tang Ziyuan, what do you take me for? Are you thinking of getting back together with that bitch, Lin Yun? Am I right? Tang Ziyuan was furious. The person he owed the most in his life was Lin Yun. Now that Zhao Ku said that to her, he felt all his anger ignite in that instant. He had never hit Zhao Ku, but now, he raised his hand and slapped Zhao Ku's face. I'm the one who spoiled you. You've been living like a princess all these years, and you've forgotten your manners. Even if you want to join the upper class, look at yourself. Do you think you're fit to be Tang Axian's mother? Tang Ziyuan's words were harsh. Zhao Ku's face was marked with 5 fingers. She covered her face and stared at Tang Ziyuan. You hit me. She repeated it again, then threw herself in front of Tang Ziyuan and started to fight with all her might, just like an ordinary vixen. Tang Ziyuan, do you know how I've been living all these years? Look at you, you're just a hands-off boss. I have to take care of Tang Axian, a sick child who might not even live past the age of 20. Where were you when Tang Axian had a fever? You are in the bed of a young model, making love to her. Zhao Ku's tied-up hair was a little messy and scattered on her face. Her eyelashes, which were originally very exquisite, now looked like a lump of black paste. It looked a little scary. Tang Ziyuan narrowed his eyes and grabbed Zhao Ku's wrist. What about you, my dear Mrs. Tang? Haven't you had any close contacts all these years? Zhao Ku was stunned. Her hand was suspended in midair, and her expression was somewhat shocked. Tang Ziyuan knew. Giving face to others is also giving face to yourself. Tang Ziyuan let go of her, and Zhao Ku lost the strength, took a few steps back and fell on the sofa. She looked at Tang Ziyuan dejectedly. Her face was burning and her heart was beating very fast. Chapter 275. Tang Ziyuan looked at Zhao Ku's distorted face. Where was the beauty left in the face that could topple a city? There was a wave of disgust in his eyes. Zhao Ku raised her face. There were still traces of tears on her face as she stared at him. Her voice was a little absent-minded, but there was also a hint of mockery in it. Tang Ziyuan, you don't have to say it so nicely. Do you think I don't know that in your heart, you can't forget that bitch Lin Yun? Seeing his expression change, she sneered, even if you beat me to death, I'll still call her a bitch. She lost you, but she stole your heart. Tang Ziyuan, do you know that you call her Yun Yun in your dreams? Zhao Ku looked up and chuckled. How does it feel to be hated by the woman you love? Tell me. Tang Ziyuan clenched his fists so tightly that the veins on his fingers were popping out. Zhao Ku was in so much pain, but she didn't make a sound. Because Tang Ziyuan was in more pain than she was. Suddenly, he let go of her. Zhao Ku held onto the sofa's armrest and coughed violently. Her disheveled hair didn't look like Mrs. Tang at all. Tang Ziyuan sneered, Zhao Ku, if you know your place, I can still give you glory and wealth. But if you go too far, I won't let you off. As he spoke, he walked outside. Didn't he say he was in the bed of a model? Then he'd go look for her. Zhao Ku supported herself and was still panting. She stared at Tang Ziyuan's back and casually threw something over, which hit Tang Ziyuan's shoulder. It was a decoration. It was hard. Tang Ziyuan's body swayed. He turned around and looked at Zhao Ku calmly. You're unreasonable. Zhao Ku didn't know what to do. She stood up shakily and shouted at the top of her lungs, Tang Ziyuan, go look for your Yun Yun. Let's see if she'll still talk to you, she laughed maniacally. Let's see if your saintly ex-wife will still want a dirty man like you. Tang Ziyuan didn't turn around. He opened the car door and started the car. Zhao Ku watched as the car sped away. She stood there and stared blankly, his whole body seemed to have lost its strength. Then, he slipped and fell to the ground. She raised her head and tears rolled down her cheeks silently. After a while, her body began to tremble. She couldn't let Pei Chi marry into the Tang family. She couldn't let anyone find out that she and Tang Xan were sisters. If that happened, sooner or later, the truth would be exposed. Pei Chi was here to collect the debt. Why didn't she die? Why didn't she die? Zhao Ku slowly stood up. She reached out and combed her hair, raising her head. She was the most beautiful woman in B City, and many men were kneeling under her skirt. She couldn't let Tang Ziyuan know. She didn't want to live that kind of destitute life anymore. So what if she was her biological daughter? If he tried to stop her, he would still die. Zhao Ku found Rong Lei. After a round of passionate lovemaking, Zhao Ku laid on Rong Lei's chest. Her fingers caressed it gently. Her voice was a little coquettish. Rong Lei, can you do it for me again? What's so hard about it? Rong Lei took the medicine and was full of energy. Zhao Ku stopped him and glanced at him. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about getting rid of Pei Chi. Chapter 276. Zhao Ku stared into his eyes. You don't dare. Rong Lei smiled bitterly. He was no longer in the mood to do that. He sat up and leaned against the headboard. Looking at Zhao Ku, he took out a cigarette from the bedside table and lit it up. After a few puffs, he patted Zhao Ku's face. The situation is so tense now. Do you want me to go in like that old woman Zhou? And he was not stupid. If Zhou Meilin went in, if something really happened to Pei Chi, it would definitely be traced back to him. The last time something happened to the young master of the Lin family, it was Zhou Meilin who took the blame for it on account of their past relationship. Rong Lei did not want to get involved anymore. Zhao Ku snatched the cigarette from his hand and glared at him. Have you forgotten how you used to kneel at my feet and say that you would always listen to me and do anything for me? Rollercoasters sighed. I did say that, but you can't send me to my death. Fictional, you know best what I do. Do you think you can trust my words? He looked at her sideways. Fictional was so angry that her whole body was trembling. Rollercoasters was just a dog she kept, but this dog was now biting back at its owner. She slapped Rollercoasters' face and Fictional immediately lifted the blanket and got out of bed. Rollercoasters touched his face and laughed. Why are you in such a hurry? But I'm curious why you want to get rid of her. Fictional did not say anything and just put on her clothes. Rollercoasters chuckled. Could it be that you're jealous that she's prettier than you? He also wanted to touch such a beautiful and tender girl. Fictional turned around and sneered. I like it. I'm happy. Rollercoasters, you bastard. Don't look for me when you have no money in the future. Rollercoasters was the best at coaxing women. Although he was scolded, he still got off the bed and hugged Fictional from behind. He blew into her ear and said, Baby, why would I look for you for money? However, Fictional wasn't like Zhou Meilin. To Fictional, a pretty boy like Rollercoasters was just a toy and a tool. She sneered and pushed him away. Don't give me that. After saying that, he packed everything up, not leaving a single coin for Rollercoasters. After the door was closed, Rollercoasters walked to the bedside naked, picked up a cigarette, and blew out a long smoke ring. He narrowed his eyes, and his smiling face became a little ruthless. Did Fictional think he was a vegetarian? He had worked so hard today, but it was all for nothing. Since she didn't play by the rules, she shouldn't blame him for giving her a hard time. Rollercoasters took out a few photos from his cell phone. They were photos of him and Fictional in bed. He thought that this would be worth a lot more than if he were to risk his life to do it. Rollercoasters leaned against the headboard and sent the photos to Fictional, then he chuckled and puffed out the smoke. Just as he expected, Fictional returned to the room in less than 10 minutes. She held the cell phone in her hand and stood at the door, staring at him. Rollercoasters, what are you trying to do? Rollercoasters played with the lighter, and his lips curled into a devilish smile. Nothing much. I just want to take a photo and reminisce about it. His eyes stared straight at her. Fictional raised her head slightly. Her hands were trembling as she gripped her purse tightly. How much do you want? Rollercoasters chuckled. Maybe I don't want money. Chapter 277. Fictional had always relied on her good looks and a bit of stinky money to never take him seriously. In her eyes, he, Rollercoasters, was just a toy. Then today, he would let her see how a toy could make her fall so miserably. Rollercoasters, you bastard. Fictional scolded angrily. Rollercoasters finished a cigarette and threw his cell phone aside. Don't play any tricks, and don't think that you'll get away with stealing my cell phone. I've made a lot of copies of the photos. If you don't mind the whole world knowing, you can play tricks with me. He looked at her with a pleased expression. Fictional, it's a pity that you're not seen by all the men in the world. Fictional stared at him. What on earth do you want? Take off your clothes, crawl on the ground, and bark like a dog. Rollercoasters looked at her. Mrs. Tang, I believe that you did this a lot before you married Tang Ziyuan, right? Fictional wanted to slap him. Rollercoasters sneered. Fictional, do you really think that you're that 18-year-old girl? That every man wants to fuck you when they see you? Let me tell you, in my eyes, Rollercoasters, you're just a bitch, and it's free. He swayed his body and held the cigarette in one hand. Are you going to crawl or not? If not, I'm going to send the photos out. He patted her face. I think you'll be installed with a hard drive. How many men will look at you and fantasize about it? Ronglei laughed like a common man. He had completely fallen out with her. What was he afraid of? She still had a little trick in his hand. She couldn't escape from his palm. If I crawl, will you give me back the photos? Zhao Ku stared at Ronglei. Of course. Finally, Zhao Ku put her fingers on her buttons and undid them one by one, when she lay on the ground, crawling and barking like a dog. Ronglei stepped on her back and kicked her. He squatted down and looked into her eyes. He grabbed her hair and said, Zhao Ku, I really want to find a mirror for you to look at. You look like a bitch with your eyes on. He laughed hysterically, and in the end, he even burned her arm with the cigarette butt. Zhao Ku shrank back. This is the mark I gave you. Ronglei sneered and kicked her hard. Get lost. Zhao Ku knelt in front of him, holding the $1 million check. Her hair was a mess and her expression was delicate and pitiful. Ronglei, I beg you, for the sake of our past relationship, return the photos to me. Ronglei looked at her and chuckled. Return it to you. Zhao Ku, do you think you can get rid of me with this little bit of money? She clenched her teeth and wrote a $10 million check. Ronglei knew that she wasn't well off financially and wouldn't steal public funds like Zhou Meilin, so he accepted it and deleted the photos in front of her. After deleting it, he kicked her again. From now on, let's go our separate ways. If you dare to make trouble for me, I'll expose you for wanting to kill someone. Zhao Ku bit her lip and didn't say a word. She put on her clothes piece by piece. She felt extremely humiliated. All these years, she had finally taken off her clothes and put them back on. But now, she was barking like a dog in front of Ronglei. What was Ronglei? He was just a toy. She wouldn't let him off. One day, she would make him a dog in front of her. She would definitely humiliate him. Chapter 278. Zhao Ku couldn't stand Ronglei's words. No matter what, he couldn't say that she was old. Zhao Ku covered her face and went downstairs to the car. She turned over the mirror and looked at herself carefully. Her skin was smooth and delicate. She was in her early 40s, but she was still beautiful. But Ronglei said she was old. No, she wasn't old. How could she be old? She was the most beautiful woman in B City. Many men fell for her. How could she be old? Zhao Ku kept reaching out to touch her own face, urgently wanting to get confirmation, but at night, even when she asked for sex, Tang Ziyuan ignored her. He turned around and slept with his back facing her. Then, she put her hand under his pajamas. Zhao Ku, I'm not in the mood. Tang Ziyuan sat up and went straight to the guest room to sleep. This was the first time they slept in separate rooms since they were married for more than 10 years. Zhao Ku sat in the dark, grabbing her hair and pursing her lips. It was all Pei Chichi's fault. Her appearance stole her limelight. If Pei Chichi didn't show up, she wouldn't have quarreled with Tang Ziyuan and wouldn't have to worry all day. How could she let her step into the Tang family's house? Zhao Ku kept her eyes open until the sun rose. Tang Ziyuan left early in the morning, leaving Tang Xan and Zhao Ku alone for breakfast. Tang Xan ate her meal like a lady, trying to please her mother. After a while, she whispered, Mom, Dad said he'll bring me to brother's engagement party tomorrow night. Although Zhao Ku was temperamental, she was still her mother. Although Tang Xan was young, she understood her mother's position in the Tang family. Tomorrow night, her father could go, and so could she. But her mother couldn't go, because brother's real mother would be there. Zhao Ku's fork landed on the plate, making a crisp and ear-piercing sound. The engagement banquet is tomorrow night. She raised her eyes slightly and looked at the courtyard outside. So fast, Tang Xan didn't dare to say anything. She waited, hoping for her mother's approval. But she didn't have much hope, because her mother didn't seem to like Chi-Chi. Moreover, her mother liked to fight with her brother's mother and might not be willing to let her go. But to Tang Xian's surprise, Zhao Ke actually agreed. She reached out and patted Tang Xian's long hair. "Have fun. Take more pictures for me." Tang Xian stared at Zhao Ke in a daze for a long time. Mother, did she change her soul? Why was he so easy to talk to today? Tang Xian, what are you looking at? Zhao Ke snorted. Your brother loves you so much. Of course you have to go to his engagement party. Tang Xian smiled sweetly. Thank you, Mom. For the first time, she hugged Zhao Ke's neck and kissed her on the cheek. When Tang Xian's soft lips pressed against his, when her small body pressed against his, Zhao Ke really felt the existence of an angel. However, not even an angel could save her, let alone Tang Xian. She had thought of testing Pei Chi-Chi's bone marrow. Perhaps it could save Tang Xian, but how was she going to explain to Tang Ziyuan that she had a child before? Tang Ziyuan would suspect Tang Xian's identity. What would she do then? No, she couldn't. Yes, even an angel couldn't save her. Tang Xian, leave it to fate. Mom can't save you. Maybe an angel can save you and take care of you for Mom. Chapter 279. Zhao Ke went out after breakfast. Tang Xian looked at her anxiously, then waved her little hand. After the car drove away, Tang Xian ran back to her bedroom and called Pei Chi-Chi. Chi-Chi, my mom agreed to let me go with Dad. Tang Xian laid on the bed with a blissful look on her face. Pei Chi-Chi was trying on her gown for the next day. It was a dark brown muslin dress. It was elegant and long, and it was embroidered with 1,000 dense flowers from the neckline to the bottom of the dress. It gave off a mysterious vibe. With makeup, the effect was even better. Apart from being fresh and beautiful, she also looked more charming. It was Ning Jia who put on makeup for her. She coiled her hair into a retro hairstyle and added a dark golden silhouette. After Ning Jia was done, she placed her hand on Pei Chi-Chi's shoulder and sighed, "It's a pity that we gave up on the commercial." Pei Chi-Chi hung up the phone after her conversation with Tang Xian. Hearing Ning Jia's words, she couldn't help but ask, who took on the commercial in the end? Ning Jia smiled. A small-time celebrity. She acted with Wu Zhihao and some indescribable things happened between them. Of course, after the commercial was shot, they separated. That's how the entertainment industry is. As Ning Jia spoke, she remembered something. Mr. Tang objected because he didn't want you to be involved in these things. Don't overthink it. Pei Chi-Chi nodded. Ning Jia looked at her carefully again and continued to polish the other gowns. Perfect, Ning Jia praised. Tomorrow, Miss Pei will definitely amaze everyone. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that she's the most beautiful woman in the world. Because of Pei Chi-Chi's young age and her beauty, Ning Jia, who never liked to joke around, couldn't help but pinch Pei Chi-Chi's cheeks. Ning Jia, this is too high a compliment. I can't accept it, Pei Chi-Chi laughed. She looked at herself in the mirror and caressed her face. She was indeed beautiful. But she also felt guilty. Her happiness, her being together with Tang Yu, was ultimately made possible by Jin Rong's sacrifice. Also, her father was no longer around. If he was, he would definitely be happy. Definitely. Ning Jia knew a lot had happened at home recently, so after a moment of silence, she patted her on the back. It's all in the past now. Pei Chi-Chi lifted her eyes and met Ning Jia's gaze in the mirror. Her eyes were moist. After looking at it for a long time, her lips moved slightly and she said softly, "Yes, it's all over." Her phone rang again. Ning Jiao looked at the screen. I'm going out for a while. Don't worry, there are people guarding outside today. Nothing will happen again. Thinking back to that incident, Sister Ning was still a little shocked. Pei Chi smiled and said nothing. The call was from an unknown number. After she picked it up, she was surprised to hear Zhao Ke's voice. I want to see you. At that moment, Pei Chi's heart tightened. That person was her mother, but she was worse than a stranger, making things difficult for her again and again. Zhao Ke's voice was still cold. Are you afraid? Are you afraid that I'll harm you? Pei Chi pursed her lips and said, Mrs. Tang, you're exaggerating. Zhao Ke gave her the address. It was the same cafe. After hanging up the phone, Pei Chi removed her makeup and changed back into her own clothes. Before she left, she informed the 2 bodyguards and took a taxi. When she arrived at the cafe, Zhao Ke was already sitting there. Chapter 280. Pei Chi stood there for a while, then slowly walked over and quietly put down her bag. A cup of latte. Thank you, she said to the waiter, then looked at Zhao Ke. Zhao Ke took a sip of coffee, looked up at Pei Chi, and said slowly, the first time I brought you here was 2 or 3 months ago. At that time, you didn't understand these things. But now, you're so used to it. Her fingers suddenly grabbed Pei Chi, and her expression was a little tense. See, this is the power of money. Money and power can make you reborn. Pei Chi smiled lightly. Really? What about you? Have you gotten rid of the greed in your bones? The darkness on your body will never be able to see the light. No matter how much money you have, you can never wash away your greed. Zhao Ke leaned forward and stared at Pei Chi's little face. Her eyes fell on the pink diamond on her finger. This pink diamond, which was dozens of carats, was priceless. Her fingers grabbed Pei Chi's. Zhao Ke was very thin, so when she exerted force, her fingers were as scary as a chicken's claws. Don't pretend to be virtuous in front of me. With this diamond in your hand, you can open 100 shops like this. Pei Chi, money can't wash away the darkness in my heart, but it can change my fate. Zhao Ke said with a smile, but that smile was extremely sinister. I don't have to look at those men's faces anymore. I don't have to sleep with this man tonight, and with another man tomorrow night. I don't have to be slapped in the ears and called a mistress anymore. Zhao Ke raised her head and said coldly, because I'm Mrs. Tang, Tang Ziyuan's wife. No one dares to look down on me anymore. But you still look down on yourself. Pei Chi looked down. Mrs. Tang, Dad is dead. I just want to ask you one thing today. In your heart, what is Dad? Don't you feel anything about his death? That was the man for whom she had given birth to a child, Zhao Ke sneered. I don't even like you, so why would I mention Pei Mingyi? To tell you the truth, in my eyes, a man like Pei Mingyi is just a dog. You don't even deserve to carry my shoes. If it wasn't for the fact that she had to get rid of the seed in her stomach, she would have endured the nausea and slept with Pei Mingyi. She remembered that night when she turned off the lights. Even if she couldn't see, she could feel Pei Mingyi's ecstasy as he touched her as if she was an antique. How disgusting. All men were the same. Pei Chi raised her head, forcing back the tears in her eyes. She took out a photo from her bag. It was perfectly preserved. He slowly placed it on the table and slowly moved it to Zhao Ke. Zhao Ke was stunned. Dad kept your photo in the safe for 20 years. Maybe he sneaked a peek at it every night. Pei Chi looked at Zhao Ke and felt sorry for her father. Sometimes, he stares at my face in a daze. I know he's thinking of you. Mrs. Tang, Dad helped you raise him and never bothered you. Don't you feel anything? If you don't feel anything, then why were you with him in the first place? Because of money. Zhao Ku sneered. Because I didn't have money at that time. I slept with Pei Mingyi for one night, and he gave me 1,000,000 yuan. Chapter 281. Zhao Ku did not want to look at that picture. Because that was her 20 years ago. She must have been young and beautiful. She did not want to compare herself. She was Mrs. Tang now. She did not want to look at the past. Pei Chichi, even if I don't want you, you still grew up in a honeypot. You're still living in a villa, and I heard that Pei Mingyi treats you like a treasure. As for me, do you know what it's like to live in the slums? Do you know how painful it is to have a stepfather who wants to take advantage of you at such a young age? Zhao Ku's face trembled as she recalled the past. Her cheeks, which had been injected with hyaluronic acid, looked unnatural. She stared into Pei Chichi's eyes. I couldn't sleep all night because I didn't dare to sleep. I was afraid that I would be raped one day. Pei Chichi, you don't know how it feels. Pei Chichi did not speak. She did not know what to say. She just felt that Zhao Ku had gone crazy. Her hand was hurting from Zhao Ku's grip. It was so painful that it almost sank into her flesh. Later, I was raped by that bastard. He tortured me 3 or 4 times in one night. I lost a lot of blood. I was so scared. I didn't dare to tell my mother. I was afraid that I would be abandoned. I told her before. She scolded me for seducing her man. Zhao Ku said and laughed. Later, I got over it. I didn't care anymore. When that man wanted it, I gave it to him in exchange for some pocket money. At that time, I thought that my body was so valuable. Until one day, when my mother found out, she smashed me with something, causing my face to be covered in blood. She scolded me for being shameless, scolded me for being a bitch, but towards her man, the man who raped me, she did not say a single word of blame. She was only afraid that the man did not want her. Zhao Ku sneered, that's the real bitch. She lifted her eyes and looked at Pei Chichi. Scared? There's more to it. I curled up in the corner of the bed and laughed at that bitch. I told him that as long as he beat my mother up now, he would divorce her. I did it with him. Zhao Ku had a proud smile on her face. Guess what? That man really beat my mom to death. Later on, we did it in front of her. Zhao Ku moved her face closer to Pei Chichi. Then, she went crazy. Pei Chichi's breathing was a little chaotic. She stared at Zhao Ku and asked, where is that man? You really know me. No wonder you're my son. Zhao Ku took out a cigarette and lit it. Then, she said nonchalantly, then he died. You killed him. Pei Chichi's fingers were shaking. She wanted to move, but she couldn't. Zhao Ku smiled. There's no need for me to do anything. There are many men who would sell their lives for me as long as I sleep with them. Pei Chichi pursed her lips. Aren't you tired of living like this? So I need to find someone to rely on. Zhao Ku chuckled. Don't mention your father to me again. How much money does Pei Mingyi have in his pocket? It's not even enough for me to eat and drink for 2 years. Pei Chichi looked at her. So you changed your target again. Are you going to destroy Tang Ziyuan's family? Zhao Ku sneered. It's a matter of mutual consent. I didn't use a knife to force him to sleep with me. However, I do have something to share with you. Zhao Ku took out a list from her bag and pushed it in front of Pei Chichi. Chapter 282. After a long time, Pei Chichi asked with a trembling voice, where's the child? In front of her, there was a pregnancy test report, and the name on it was Lin Yun. At that time, Tang Yu was 10 years old, and Lin Yun was very happy to be pregnant again after 10 years. Zhao Ku looked at Pei Chi-Chi indifferently. She opened her eyes and narrowed them like a wild cat. She narrowed her eyes and said, "The child is gone. I was the one who got someone to push her and caused her to miscarry." Pei Chi-Chi felt that all the blood in her body was frozen. She almost couldn't believe what she had heard. Zhao Ku, in order to get the position, did not hesitate to let others have a miscarriage. "I have suffered too much, and I have suffered too much. I have lived in a small house, and the cold nights were too hard. I can't wait to marry Tang Ziyuan." Zhao Ku raised her head, "So, I won't allow anyone to stand in my way." "So, you used other people's blood to warm yourself?" Pei Chi-Chi's voice seemed to be frozen. When she spoke, she didn't know what she was saying, only that her lips were moving. She couldn't hear anything around her. Her mind was filled with images of blood flowing out of her body. In that scene, there was the fierce Zhao Ku, Lin Yun, who was lying on the ground, and the unborn child. It was all blood, full of Zhao Ku's sins. "Now that you have heard my story, do you have any thoughts?" Zhao Ku recovered quickly, and at this time, she was already holding a cup of coffee and sipping it carefully. Pei Chi-Chi really wondered if she could taste blood. She looked at Zhao Ku's face. "All these years, haven't you had nightmares?" "Yes." Zhao Ku smiled and didn't care, "But it's not real." "Pei Chi-Chi, the riches and honor in your hands are the real deal." She suddenly sighed. "The grudge between me, Lin Yun, and Tang Ziyuan can't be settled in this life. Lin Yun also knows that I killed her child, but she didn't say it. It's good that she didn't say it, so I can be my Mrs. Tang in peace." Pei Chi-Chi felt a chill run down her spine. Zhao Ku really translated the word ugly so thoroughly and vividly. "Aren't you afraid that I'll tell others?" She stared into Zhao Ku's eyes and said slowly. Zhao Ku smiled and picked up a cigarette to smoke. She tilted her head and looked at Pei Chi-Chi. "It's good that you spread the news. Let Tang Yu know that your mother killed his sister. I forgot to tell you, it should be a baby girl." Pei Chi-Chi could no longer sit still. She wanted to leave, but just as she stood up, Zhao Ku's voice rang out faintly. "Pei Chi-Chi, do you think you can still marry Tang Yu?" She raised her hand and chuckled. "Look, my hand is covered in blood. I can't wash it off no matter what. When you sleep with him, when you lie next to him, won't you have nightmares? You are my daughter, and you have the same blood flowing in your body. Think about it, if one day, Tang Yu or Lin Yun knew that you are my daughter, what would they think of you?" Zhao Ku closed her eyes, and there was a strange smile on her face. "Pei Chi-Chi, accept your fate. This is your fate. You and Tang Yu should never have started. If you really can't make up your mind, think about Lin Jinrong. He is Tang Yu and Lin Yun's closest relative. He became a vegetable because of you." Chapter 283. Zhao Ku was still sitting there drinking coffee as she watched Pei Chi-Chi walk out. She put away the list. It was real. Everything she had said to Pei Chi-Chi was true. She had killed Lin Yun's child and married Tang Ziyuan with someone else's child. However, what did this matter? No one knew. This was an eternal secret. However, Pei Chi-Chi could not marry into the Tang family. It was too dangerous. She would kill everyone, including herself. It was fine for Pei Chi-Chi to be played by Tang Yu, but she must not give birth to Tang Yu's child. Absolutely not. Pei Chi-Chi did not take the car. She walked back to Xia City in a daze. It was already noon when she walked back. She then remembered that she was supposed to work today and Tang Yu would not be back for lunch. Little Wen called her a few times. She called back and said that she was not feeling well and needed to rest for a few days. I know. Boss Pei is getting engaged tomorrow. Don't be too tired, Little Wen said cheerfully with a hint of warmth in her words. The phone slipped from Pei Chi-Chi's hand. Her face was pale and she smiled faintly. Engagement, could she still be engaged to Tang Yu? Her mother had done such a thing to Tang Yu's mother. Could she still stay by his side, marry him, and bear his child in the future? She knew that Zhao Ke's motive was not pure. However, she could not get past herself. She could not. Lin Yun's child and Jinrong. Pei Chi-Chi sat on the sofa and hugged her body. She felt very cold, however, hugging and touching like this could not warm her at all. She sat like this until 4 in the afternoon. When her phone rang, it was Tang Yu's exclusive ringtone. Her body trembled and she almost did not dare to look at it. After a long time, she picked up. Her voice was a little hoarse. Tang Yu. His voice was as elegant as ever. It's time to get off work. Where are you now? Do you need me to pick you up? I'm at home, she said quickly, and then added, come back soon, and I'll cook for you. Tang Yu laughed. I hope I can see what I want to see. Mrs. Tang, get ready. Mr. Tang is looking forward to it. Mrs. Tang. She was surprised. Tang Yu smiled. A certain brat probably can't get used to this identity yet. How about this, we'll get used to this new identity tonight. Pei Chi-Chi's face was a little hot. After a long while, she pursed her lips and said, I'll wait for you. After hanging up, Tang Yu was in a good mood. Very soon, the things on hand were settled. Even when Xiao Ran came in, he could feel that the CEO was in a particularly good mood. President, starting tomorrow, all the work is scheduled for next week. Xiao Ran smiled. Have a good weekend. Tang Yu nodded faintly and then smiled. It's just a family get-together, so I'll treat you the next time I get married. Although Secretary Xiao had heard about it, he was still a little surprised. The CEO and Chi-Chi were really engaged. Congratulations, President. Xiao Ran smiled. Secretary, can you apply for an allowance and have afternoon tea? Of course. Tang Yu picked up a list from the table, wrote a set of numbers, and gave it to Xiao Ran. Do as you see fit. Also, prepare a list for the other departments. It was a celebration. Xiao Ran looked at the number and was a little shocked. Oh my God, 1 million. Tang Yu waited for Xiao Ran to leave before leaning against the back of the chair. His slender fingers reached out to caress his smooth chin as he smiled slightly. Chapter 284. Tang Yu bought a bouquet of white roses from a florist and put it on the passenger seat. When he returned to Xia City, he didn't knock on the door but opened it himself. As soon as he opened the door, he was hugged by a pair of smooth hands. Pei Chi-Chi's soft body leaned against him. He held the flowers in one hand and held her waist with the other. His voice was a little hoarse. Look what you prepared for me. He looked around. The dining table was filled with exquisite food. It was more sumptuous than usual. He smiled, took off his shoes, and walked inside with her in his arms. You seem to be trying to please me today. Then he looked at her. She was wearing a very ordinary set of home clothes. Well, I hope you like it. She took him to the dining table, took off his coat, and put it on the sofa. Tang Yu looked at the dishes. He knew that she had ordered outside in addition to her own cooking. And it was all his favorite food. He felt warm inside. Who said that his Chi-Chi was a child? She also has her thoughtfulness. Pei Chi lowered her head and took out a bottle of red wine for him to open. She poured 2 glasses. Is this a celebration? Tang Yu smiled and pinched her little face. She replied softly and clinked her glass against his. Let's celebrate. Tang Yu drank 2 glasses and his body felt a little hot, because she climbed into his arms and reached out to take off her jacket. Inside, she wore a black spaghetti strap pajamas. The soft silk material clung to her delicate and curvy body. Her fair shoulders looked crystal clear. He almost didn't dare to look down. At this moment, her little hands were hanging around his neck. She pressed her face against his chest and began to unbutton his shirt one by one. Chi. He grabbed her fingers and glared at her with a warning look in his eyes. Pei Chi leaned into his arms. Tang Yu, don't you want to? How could he not want to? He thought about it so much that it hurt. He carried her to the bathroom, turned on the water, and pressed her against the wall. The wall behind her was very cold, but the body in front of her was very hot. Her long hair was scattered on her fair shoulders, and the spaghetti strap pajamas clung tightly to her body like a second layer of skin, extremely seductive. Tang Yu lowered his head and kissed her little mouth. Pei Chi shuddered. She hugged his neck with her little hands and called out his name in a whimper. Again and again he called out. As night fell, the steam in the bathroom gradually became dense, covering the whole room. After a few rounds of indulgence, he returned to the bed in the bedroom. Tang Yu was lying flat on his back, and Pei Chi was lying in his arms with only a thin blanket covering her. Tang Yu. She called his name softly, her hand moving up to caress his clean and handsome chin. Tang Yu, where are we going after the engagement? He moved his head slightly to the head of the bed and looked down at the little thing in his arms. He patted her with his big palm. His voice was unique and husky because of the sex just now. I'll take you to Yunqing to play, okay? He had already set aside some time. She must have arranged her work for the engagement. Pei Chi buried her face in his arms. Go to Yunqing to play. What's so fun there? Li Du. Tang Yu touched her little fluffy head. I'll take you to ride a horse. Pei Chi muttered, I don't want to. I'm scared. Chapter 285. Tang Yu laughed. Then we'll just ride one. She didn't say anything else and just hugged him. Although Tang Yu felt that she was too clingy today, he liked it when she relied on him, so he let her be. He lay there until he was a little drowsy. He remembered that he hadn't had dinner yet and patted Pei Chi's face. Baby, get up and eat something. She moved her little hand and placed it on his shoulder. I don't want to eat, Tang Yu. I just want to hug you. He laughed. This little clingy vixen. In the end, he still had to carry her out to eat. Fortunately, there was food, and he just needed to heat it up. It was the first time that Pei Chi sat on his lap to eat, and she felt especially pampered. You're already so old, and you're still so clingy. What will you do when you become a mother in the future? Although he was reprimanding her, his voice was unbelievably gentle. Pei Chi bit her lip and looked at him with teary eyes. His heart instantly softened again, and he said helplessly, when we have a child, I'll take care of it. I'll take care of you too. What if the baby makes you angry? She stared at him and asked softly. Tang Yu laughed, and his slender finger landed on her little mouth. After a while, he suddenly said, it depends on which baby it is. Is there a difference? Pei Chi bit his finger and gently bit it. Tang Yu's finger paused, but he didn't move it away. After a while, he laughed. If it's a baby, I'll hit her little butt. What if it's me? Her eyes were glistening. Tang Yu's finger was a little naughty. After teasing her for a while, he said slowly, it's also hitting her little butt, just like how I hit you just now. Her slightly pale face was a little red. Tang Yu hugged her, and he seemed to be a little excited as he teased her. Actually, Pei Chi-Chi, I'm quite biased towards you. Pei Chi-Chi snorted softly. At least you're in pain and you're happy. Am I biased towards you? He pinched her soft cheeks. Alright, baby, call me daddy. He did not mean to, and then he regretted it. Pei Mingyi was new, and he would inevitably remind her of her sad memories. There were some tears in Pei Chi-Chi's eyes, but she was not angry. Instead, she hugged him. She buried her face in his chest and softly called out, Daddy. Tang Yu also felt bad. He hugged her tightly and said, All right, I won't talk about it anymore. Be good and don't cry. Pei Chi-Chi cried in his arms. But this time, it wasn't for Pei Mingyi or her father. It was because of Tang Yu. She cried, and soon his chest was wet with her tears. He grabbed her hair and kissed her little mouth, drying the tears on her face. Baby, be good. Don't cry. I've already kissed you. Pei Chi-Chi raised her head and her face was very close to his. It was so close that she could smell the masculine scent on his body. It was so domineering that it stained her body. Slowly, she moved her little mouth forward and kissed his lips. Tang Yu asked hoarsely, Chi-Chi, are you sure? She nodded frantically in his arms, like a little beast begging him. That night, she had completely lost herself in it. Tang Yu kissed her little mouth, and then carried her towards the bedroom. She was thrown onto the soft bed, but she quickly got up. Chapter 286. GM Hotel. Although Tang Yu declined the media interviews, the reporters in City H all had sharp noses. They had long smelled the scent of meat. Early in the morning, they dressed casually and even booked a room in order to enter GM Hotel. The starting price of a room in GM Hotel was 8,888 yuan. It was a hefty price. When it was almost noon, the reporters hid their cameras, ready to take pictures of the engagement ceremony of Xingyuan CEO. The hotel sent out hundreds of security guards to ensure that there would be no problems with today's engagement ceremony. In just one morning, more than 10 drones were shot down. At noon, there were only 5 tables in the small banquet hall. They were all close relatives of the Lin and Tang families. There was no one else except for Lin Jinrong's mother. Tang Yu was greeting the guests and meeting up with Lin Yun. Lin Yun smiled. When they were alone, she looked at Tang Yu. Your aunt hasn't recovered yet. Don't blame her. Tang Yu patted the back of his mother's hand. Of course not. He paused. I've contacted an expert in America. He'll be in City H in about a week. I hope it'll be beneficial to Jinrong. Lin Yun nodded. She couldn't help but sigh. Your aunt is a very good person. Even after such a big thing happened, she didn't make things difficult for Chi-Chi, nor did she speak ill of her. As she spoke, she hesitated. Actually, Lin Yun knew that Jinrong's mother also liked Pei Chi-Chi quite a lot. It was just that fate played tricks on people. If it wasn't for what Pei Huan did, things wouldn't have turned out this way. Perhaps Pei Chi-Chi would be her daughter-in-law instead of Lin Yun's. Lin Yun could only sigh. Life was unpredictable. After a moment, she looked at Tang Yu and said gently, I'll take care of things here. You go and see how Chi-Chi is doing. She's still young. You can't make any mistakes and be criticized. Although the two families were related, there were still some petty people. If something went wrong, it would be bad for others to talk about it. Lin Yun had always been proud and didn't want that to happen. Tang Yu nodded. In the suite on the top floor of the hotel, Pei Chi-Chi looked at herself in the mirror. She was very beautiful today. Tang Yu had specially prepared a dress, jewelry, and shoes for her. After she put it on, she looked at herself as if Cinderella had turned into a swan. He had given her too much. Everything was too surreal. She wanted to be engaged to him, to go to Yuncheng with him, to Lidu, to every place he wanted to take her. Perhaps they would get pregnant unexpectedly. Tang Yu would definitely do it. He couldn't wait that long. He was so bad, he would definitely get her pregnant. After giving birth to the baby, they would get married and live together for the rest of their lives. Pei Chi looked at herself in the mirror and smiled. Pei Chi, I wish you happiness. She stubbornly wore the dress because it was her engagement day. Tang Yu, in my heart, I'm already married to you. Just last night, just now, she raised her head slightly, not letting the tears fall. In the past 2 days, she had thought about many, many things. She had found countless reasons for herself to stay by his side, but there was always a voice in her heart that said, Pei Chi, you can't be selfish anymore. Yes, she wouldn't be selfish anymore. Pei Chi slowly removed the pink diamond from her hand, took off the bracelet, and put them on the vanity table. Chapter 287. When Tang Yu walked into the lounge, his body stiffened and his gaze turned cold. Behind him was Tang Xian, his little tail. Tang Xian's jaw dropped. She stared at the gown on the sofa and the jewelry on the dressing table. They were all worn by Chi today. Did Chi run away from the wedding? Tang Xian did not dare to look at her brother's face. It must be dark. Tang Yu walked in slowly and said coldly, Tang Xian, close the door. Don't let anyone in. Tang Xian nodded, then looked up at her brother again. Tang Yu walked straight to the bathroom and then to the bedroom. He really hoped that Chi was just joking with him and that she would hide somewhere in her bathrobe. When she found him, she would smile sweetly and look at his anxious expression. But she was not there. He searched the entire suite but she was not there. He took out his phone and dialed her number. Her phone was switched off. Great. Brother, there's a letter here. Tang Xian exclaimed. Tang Yu quickly walked over, reached out to take it, and opened it. It was written by Pei Chi. There were only a few words, but Tang Yu's face turned cold when he read it. He held the letter tightly and threw it away before walking out. Tang Xian hurriedly took the book and read through it. Tang Yu, I'm sorry, I can't get engaged to you anymore. I still have Jinrong in my heart. I like you, but I can't let go of Jinrong. He became like that because of me. I really can't and shouldn't get engaged to you. I'm sorry, Tang Yu. I ran away from the wedding. Tang Xian was stunned. Oh my god. The person Chi liked was Lin Jinrong. That cool Lin Jinrong. She gulped and chased after him. Tang Yu walked back to the banquet hall. Lin Yun saw him and went up to him. How's Chi-Chi's preparation? Tang Yu, why do you look so pale? Tang Yu's gaze finally landed on his mother's face. He said very slowly, Mom, today's engagement banquet will probably be cancelled. Chi-Chi isn't feeling well, so I'll take her to the hospital. You handle things here. Lin Yun was taken aback. Her instincts told her that something had happened. Mom, please. After Tang Yu finished speaking, he quickly walked out without any hesitation. He wanted to find that damned little thing and make her take back what she had said. He wanted her to take back those hurtful words. He could allow her to have Jinrong in her heart, but she must love him the most. Tang Yu drove directly to the sanatorium in Jinrong, but he was late. Lin Jinrong's mother saw him. Tang Yu, Pei Chi was here. She stood in front of Jinrong's bed for a while and left for about 10 minutes. Mother Lin looked at Tang Yu. He was dressed in formal attire and looked very elegant. She had watched this child grow up, and she loved him dearly. When had Tang Yu ever been so high-spirited? When had he ever been so dispirited? However, she was very familiar with this kind of dispiritedness. It was because Jinrong had been like this when he was engaged to Pei Huan. Mother Lin hesitated for a moment and pointed in a direction. She should have gone that way. I saw her get into a taxi. Tang Yu looked at her deeply before he rushed out and got into the car. He didn't start the car immediately. Instead, he closed his eyes and thought for a while. Then, he opened his eyes and made a call to Xiao Ran. Help me check if there are any records of Pei Chi staying in all the hotels. Chapter 288. Xiao Ran on the other side of the phone was shocked. Investigating Pei Chi. So she ran away from the marriage. Xiao Ran swallowed hard and couldn't say anything for a long time. She had always been calm, but she couldn't stay calm at this time. Tang Yu hung up the phone, held the steering wheel with his slender fingers, looked ahead and started the car. In less than 5 minutes, Xiao Ran called. He picked it up without any expression on his face. President, I checked all the hotel records, but there is no name of Miss Pei. Xiao Ran's voice was a little nervous. Tang Yu held the phone for a long time and said softly, I see. He hung up the phone and dialed Pei Chi's number again, but her phone was still turned off. For 3 days, Pei Chi seemed to have disappeared from the world. Tang Yu looked for her crazily, almost looking for everyone related to her, including Pei Huan, but there was still no news of her. He looked for all the train attendants and all the high-speed trains, but there was no record of her buying a ticket. 5 days later, Pei Chi appeared in the hospital. She stood in front of Lin Jinrong's bed and looked at him quietly. Jinrong, you are still the same. I can't wake you up no matter how I call you. Pei Chi's little face was much thinner, and her big eyes were a little sunken because of her thinness. The beige coat on her body seemed a little empty. Her fingers touched Lin Jinrong's hand gently. Jinrong, I went to Lidu in Yunqing. I learned to ride a horse there, alone. At first, I was very afraid, but later, I felt not afraid anymore. She closed her eyes. Jinrong, you know, when I have nothing and nothing to lose, I am not afraid anymore. Sorry, I used you. She said in a low voice, I told Tang Yu that I couldn't forget you. Lin Jinrong was still quiet, in the quietest audience. Pei Chi slowly squatted down and looked at his sleeping face. Jinrong, you have to get better. You're different from me. There's not so much darkness behind your back. You have to wake up. She wept, and the tears rolled down her cheeks and onto his fingers. His fingers were pale and powerless. Her hot tears stained his skin. Lin Jinrong's fingers trembled slightly. Pei Chi immediately looked up at his face. She stared at him, afraid to miss the slightest sign of life. But there was nothing. Other than just now, she didn't know if it was her imagination, but there was nothing. Pei Chi did not give up. She pressed the bell and called the nurse. Her breathing was unstable and she was a little agitated. I felt him move just now. It's real. His fingers moved. The nurse looked at her in surprise. She checked again, but the result was disappointing. Miss Pei, you must be hallucinating because you want the patient to wake up. The nurse smiled apologetically. She looked at the little girl in front of her. She came here often, but now she was crying like a kitten. It was heartbreaking. Pei Chi lowered her face in disappointment. She looked at Lin Jinrong for a long time before she said softly, probably. After the nurse left, she covered Jinrong with the quilt and stood a step away. I may not be able to visit you often in the future, because she couldn't face Tang Yu. Just by looking at him, she would be reminded of how much he doted on her and what Zhao Ku had done to his mother. Chapter 289. After Pei Chi said that, she felt as though her throat was blocked, and it was extremely uncomfortable. She owed Pei Mingyi, Jinrong, and Tang Yu, and she would never be able to pay them back in this lifetime. However, she would try her best to pay them back, as much as she could. She left and closed the door gently. However, when she turned around, she saw Tang Yu. He stood straight and looked at her with a little coldness in his eyes. Pei Chi noticed that he was still wearing the same suit from the other day. He hadn't shaved his beard, and his eyes were bloodshot. He looked completely different from his usual elegant self. At that moment, her heart was in extreme pain. This was Tang Yu, the distinguished Tang Yu, the elegant Tang Yu who was still elegant even after a meeting that lasted more than 10 hours. She looked at him. They were just a step apart, but it seemed as though there were thousands of mountains between them. Their gazes lingered for a long time. Her lips moved, but she couldn't say a word. After seeing his current appearance, those cruel words disintegrated one by one. I've been looking for you for 5 days. Tang Yu stared into her eyes and slowly said a few words. Her body trembled, and her voice was dry. I've written it very clearly in the letter. Really? He suddenly grabbed her wrist and pulled her to his side. Her body bumped into his, and she wanted to escape, but he held her waist firmly and it hurt. Pei Chi, do you feel a sense of accomplishment seeing me like this? His thin lips said coldly, and then he dragged her to the elevator. Pei Chi struggled with all her might, but he seemed to be cold-blooded. Even if she was in pain, he still grabbed her and threw her into the elevator. He was so angry that he didn't hold back, and Pei Chi's head hit the wall of the elevator. She only recovered after a long time, and her body slowly turned around and leaned against the wall of the elevator. She looked at him, and a bitter smile slowly appeared at the corner of her lips. Tang Yu, I still owe you. But I cannot marry you. He did not speak because he did not want to talk to her now. He was afraid that if he spoke, he would accidentally strangle her. Pei Chi was thrown into the car like a rag, and when they got home, she was thrown onto the sofa. She sat up and looked up at him. Tang Yu reached out to pull off his tie and squinted at her. Because of Jinrong. Do you love him? Pei Chi's lips trembled as she moved back. He bent over and pinched her little chin. Pei Chi, what about me? What am I? He asked in a forceful voice. Tang Yu. She called his name in pain. His eyes were bloodshot, and he tightened his grip. She was in so much pain that she almost cried. What am I? He stared into her eyes, his voice revealing a hint of suppression. She closed her eyes and did not want to say anything. Tang Yu narrowed his eyes and suddenly let go of her. He unbuttoned his shirt and looked at her. His voice was cold. I'll let you say it. Pei Chi moved her body and looked at him in horror, the memory of that night surfaced like a demon. Don't worry, I won't use force on you. His face was expressionless. Then he bent over and tore her coat apart. She screamed, Tang Yu, you can't do this to me. You can't. She knew what he wanted to do. No, she didn't want to do that, because she would break down and be reluctant. Pei Chi struggled hopelessly in his hands. Tang Yu, I love Jinrong. I love him. I've never forgotten him. I'm sorry, I've never loved you. His movement stopped abruptly. Chapter 290. Pei Chi's face was covered in tears as she muttered, Right, I don't love you. The one I love has always been Jinrong. Tang Yu looked at her just like that, his eyes filled with heartache. Suddenly, her face was slapped by him. Everything around her seemed to have stopped, and she couldn't hear anything. Her face was burning, and she lost all feeling. After a long while, Pei Chi slowly moved her face over and slowly raised her eyes. Pei Chi, say that again. The first time he made a move on her, he slapped her in the face, but it tore his heart apart. The little thing that he doted on, the little thing that he was willing to give everything to, they were going to get engaged. He thought that she was slowly falling in love with him. Even if Jinrong still existed in her heart, it was because of guilt. But what did she say to him now? She said that she had always loved Jinrong. Then what about him, Tang Yu? Then what about their sweetness? If she didn't love him, why did she say those words to him? Did she know that when you think you've obtained something, you're ecstatic, but when you lose it, it's like you've lost the whole world? Pei Chi-Chi's fingers lightly touched her face. It hurt, and her skin almost broke. He had used all of his strength. She slowly looked up at him and said in a numb voice, "You bought me." His fingers pressed against her shoulder. She frowned in pain and didn't dare to make a sound. Pei Chi-Chi, do you also know pain? He stared into her eyes, so angry that he wanted to kill her. I only bought you. You only obeyed me, right? Her delicate body was like a reed in the wind when he held it like this. You never had any love for me, did you? He asked her through gritted teeth. Pei Chi-Chi's face was covered in tears, and her vision was a blur. She told herself that if she told him now that she was Zhao Ke's daughter, perhaps Tang Yu would forgive her, and still be with her, or even marry her. But if that happened, who would she be able to face? Tang Yu? Or Lin Yun? How was she going to live in the future? She would rather. Tang Yu had never loved her. She would rather that he treated her a little worse. Lifting her chin slightly, she looked into his eyes and smiled. Yes, it's just obedience. Otherwise. What else do you think there is? Tang Yu, let's not deceive ourselves anymore, okay? He held her with one hand and caressed her red lips with the other. His movements were so slow that she was shocked. You say, deceiving yourself. I bought them, didn't I? He chuckled, but there wasn't a hint of a smile in his eyes. His fingers were still caressing her red lips. If it's bought, then it should be bought. He had once given his heart to her, but when she held it in her hands, it was shattered. Narrowing his eyes, he looked at her tearful little face. His slender fingers gently scratched her little face twice, but the words that came out of his mouth were unusually cruel. Now, take off your clothes, please me. Pei Chi-Chi was stunned. Don't tell me you still expect me to hold you in my hands and serve you. He patted her little face and let go of her. His body slowly fell to the sofa behind him and sat down. Pei Chi-Chi was abnormally humiliated, but she had brought this humiliation upon herself. Let me go. She knelt in front of him humbly. Her hair was disheveled, and her clothes were tattered. Chapter 291. His voice was hoarse. Jinrong is like this now, yet you still love him. Pei Chi-Chi, your love is so great. Listening to Tang Yu's cold words, Pei Chi-Chi half knelt there, unable to say a word. Her pain was no less than his. Tang Yu, you don't know how much I tried to leave you. You don't know how much I wanted to be in your arms for the rest of my life. What pain in this world could be more painful than leaving you? Her fingers trembled as she tried to undo the buttons on her shirt. She unbuttoned them one by one. Apparently, he couldn't wait any longer and suddenly grabbed her hand. She looked up at him, and their eyes met. Tang Yu's Adam's apple kept moving and he closed his eyes. Pei Chi-Chi, I'll ask you for the last time. Just obey me. He didn't allow himself to beg her anymore. He just asked her this way. Pei Chi-Chi's hand was held by him. As she listened to his words, she felt as though it was a lifetime ago. After a long while, she gently broke away from his hand. Under his gaze, she unbuttoned all the buttons on her shirt and knelt down to unbutton them for him. She looked very humble, but he hated it. She leaned into his arms, kissed his neck, and used the way he liked to please him. To please him, everything was like a woman who was bought. Tang Yu suddenly pushed her away and walked straight to the bathroom. Pei Chi-Chi fell on the soft carpet and bit her lips. Before he closed the bathroom door, he said coldly, "Next time, before you do it, wash yourself clean. Don't let me smell another man's scent on you, because it's dirty." When she heard his cruel words, her limbs felt weak and she couldn't stand up. About 10 minutes later, Tang Yu came out. He was dressed neatly and had returned to his usual appearance. When he walked to her side, he paused for a moment and said in a cold and indifferent voice, "Before I think of how to deal with you, I'll stay here. What about you?" She looked up at him. Tang Yu's gaze was even colder. "You still care about me?" He sneered. "This isn't something a bought woman should ask." After saying that, he left without any reluctance, leaving her alone in the cold house. He said he wouldn't let her go, but she didn't dare to. Pei Chi-Chi's lips pulled a desolate smile. One day, he would tire of it. She slowly got up and went to the bathroom to clean herself. She heard him say, "Pei Chi-Chi, your body, your entire being has the smell of someone else." She closed her eyes and let her tears fall, mixing with the hot water and washing them away. "Pei Chi-Chi, let him hate you. Only by hating you, will he forget you. Tang Yu deserves the most perfect life, not to be destroyed by you." However, her heart ached to give him up. Previously, she had convinced herself for so long that she could selfishly have him. She did not want to give up. She did not want to leave. She wanted him, Tang Yu. Pei Chi-Chi slowly squatted down and hugged herself with her arms. She squatted there, sobbing like an injured animal. It was only in this small world that she dared to cry so freely, dared to call his name like this. She dared to tell herself that she loved him. She loved Tang Yu. She loved him very, very much. She loved him so much that she couldn't bear to part with him. Because of her, she regretted it. Pei Chi-Chi showered for an hour before she went out. Her skin was almost broken. She wore a bathrobe, and her long hair was wet and draped over her shoulders. Looking at the mirror, she murmured, "Is this clean?" However, no one could answer her. Chapter 292. Tang Yu had left. There was only her and her broken heart here. Pei Chi-Chi sat on the sofa. She didn't eat or sleep. She just sat there. Occasionally, there would be some movement at the door. She would look out like an injured animal. She was a little dazed. She felt that the person outside was Tang Yu. She felt that he would suddenly open the door and look at her. "Pei Chi-Chi, are you joking with me? Look, you're so stupid. How can you lie to me?" He raised his eyebrows. "Now, let's get engaged." She lifted her body in the dark. She stretched her arms out, wanting to hug his neck. However, all she hugged was cold air, Tang Yu. She murmured his name. Her arms refused to let go. She didn't want to give up. She felt that he was still there. Early in the morning, a ray of sunlight shone on the sofa. Pei Chi-Chi was only wearing a bathrobe. The glaring sunlight shone on her face and she moved uncomfortably. There was the sound of a key turning at the door. Pei Chi-Chi blinked and immediately sat up. She was a little dizzy, but her eyes were wide open as she looked at the door. It wasn't Tang Yu who came in. It was Xiao Ran. There were two maids behind him. Xiao Ran looked at Pei Chi-Chi. He smiled and nodded. President asked me to come over and take his personal belongings away. Chi-Chi, I might need you to confirm it. Pei Chi-Chi felt a little sour in her heart. She naturally knew what he meant by this. This was no longer his home. She didn't know what he would do to her if he was handling his belongings like this. Okay. She heard her own voice. She walked slowly into the changing room and opened his locker blankly. These are Mr. Tang's clothes. And here, she opened a small drawer. These are his accessories. Pei Chi-Chi pursed her lips and opened another secret compartment. This is a gift from him. Take it with you. She thought for a moment and said, I will make a list. Please bring it to him. Xiao Ran said hesitantly, the CEO only said to move his personal belongings. He didn't say to take them with you. Moreover, Tang Yu wouldn't do that. Pei Chi-Chi didn't say anything. She just went barefooted and pulled 2 big boxes over. After counting and sealing the boxes, the list was in Xiao Ran's hands. Xiao Ran looked at Pei Chi-Chi and sighed in her heart. She had always thought that Pei Chi-Chi and the president would end up together. She had never seen a couple as close as the president and Chi-Chi. Listen to me. If you still have feelings for the president, it's not too late. In the end, Xiao Ran still couldn't bear to see her like this. Pei Chi-Chi didn't know what was good for her. She was very grateful for Xiao Ran's intention, but she couldn't do anything about it. She couldn't even convince herself, let alone others. She didn't say anything. Xiao Ran knew that there was no turning back. It wasn't appropriate for her to ask too much about the president's private affairs, so she didn't say anything more and left. An hour later, a black limousine slowly drove into a luxurious villa. The entire villa was in the style of a European palace. It covered a vast area and looked ridiculously large. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.